Hey everyone, it's Alex Martin from Sidewalk Science Center, and today I was just at the bay. Well, don't have the best view of the park from where I'm standing right now, kind of down the hill from the nest. But we had our Earth Day event here today, so we were doing some. People could look at the sun with our solar telescope, and had some different animals and critters out in those acrylic blocks, so that people could learn about a few of the animals and birds. And actually, there's a pelican right there. So a few of the animals and birds and insects that might live in a place like here in the estuary and in the bay, and in the bay park even, among these mangroves. But the purpose of this video actually was not so much to highlight that, but it's been a couple days since the launch of Starship, and I feel like, even here on Earth Day, we can make a connection back to Starship. You'll see why later on. So we have over in Boca Chica, Texas. So this is the southernmost point of Texas, pretty much bordering with Mexico. SpaceX has built Starbase, and this is where they just launched their newest vehicle called Starship. This is something, if you've been paying attention to anything over the past few years with SpaceX, they've been building this base actually since 2014, when they first got the contract to own the land and start developing on it. But more recently, in the past for almost 5 years, is when they've really been testing at Starbase, and started with kind of that Star Hopper, the water ship, the water tower looking thing that went a couple hundred feet into the air. And this was more of a proof of concept of their engines and that they could fly something this big. Then they moved on to the base designs for Super Heavy, so their main booster that powers Starship. And of course, this is years in the making. I think it's been like 2 years since their last test, their actual flight test. And a couple days ago, on April 20th, they finally launched the first iteration of a fully stacked Starship. So, if you watch the launch, you might have some questions about, you've been hearing it called a success, even though it exploded. So that might be a question that you have. And we'll answer that here in a second. Also, looking at the sheer scale of that, question that a lot of people have is, how big is this thing? And the answer is roughly 400 feet. It's just shy of that. It's like 396 feet or something. This is a huge vehicle. This is the single largest rocket that any humans have ever created. And this is longer than a football field diagonally. That's how big this is. You can imagine the sheer scale that you have to be working with, the immense forces that you have to propel this with in order to even get this thing off the ground, which, if you watch the launch, it took about 5 seconds before they actually, I think they made the release for it to start lifting up into the air. Some of that is you have to get the engines up to full thrust, or whatever thrust that they were aiming for, before it actually takes off. So when it hit that point, when it hit countdown to 0, at like 2 seconds is when the engines actually started firing. They wouldn't have released the clamps there, and then Starship began to lift off the pad at about 5 seconds. It went very slow. It was not very high into the air. The main goal, I'll actually backtrack to this. The main goal of the Starship launch, was to clear the tower. That's roughly 550 feet above the ground that they wanted to get the rocket. They did that. That was the primary goal, was, can we get this thing to clear the tower and not explode and destroy this entire pad, and we have to rebuild everything. Goal succeeded. Next came the actual flight. Everything past that 500 foot mark of getting the rocket off the pad was just data collection. They made this very well known, and that's something that not a lot of people will pay attention to, that we do these tests to figure out what is working and what is not working. Everything beyond that 500 foot mark was purely, how well is the ship performing, what is going wrong, what is going right. And then, of course, if you watch the full 4-minute feed, you saw that Starship, at about the 3-minute and 59-second mark, Starship exploded. And this was after almost a period of about a minute where Starship was in this rotational phase, where SpaceX is trying out this new stage separation using basically a kinetic sling where they rotate the ship to build up centripetal force and then release Starship from the booster. That's kind of where, some people are like, okay, we already know how to separate stages. Why are they doing it this way? There's a whole list of reasons that we can give. So whether or not that was something that they should have attempted, that's a whole other discussion. But even to me, it was interesting that this was the choice that they went with, that this was the release mechanism that they went with, was rotating the ship in the air as it's traveling a couple thousand kilometers per hour, and then releasing Starship, the top half of the whole rocket. Obviously, it didn't work. Something went wrong. The clamps weren't released. Some of the explanations that I'm seeing are that upon liftoff, there was so much force under the booster that it actually folded some of the clamps down and locked them together to the two halves together on something called the interstage. And that's one of the reasons that some people are speculating it didn't release from each other. So that's the one that I kind of am going with too. But you have to see what are they saying, what's the data that people are collecting from this, before we really figure out what's a better way of getting these two absolutely massive rockets to separate from each other in future iterations. Let's see, going through the flight right now. Oh, if you were paying attention to how high the booster was, to how high the whole stack was, at the point of explosion, it was only about 22 miles off the surface of the Earth. If you know anything about rocketry and where we define the line of space, 60 to 80 miles above the surface of the Earth is, quote unquote, where we say the edge of space is. Most rockets, when they lift off, will reach this line within 2.5 to 3 minutes, and Starship was only 1/3 of the way there after 4 minutes. So this was a very, very, very slow moving vehicle. I was very surprised when I went back and watched the feed for the second time. I was very surprised at how low Starship was when it exploded. I went back and I looked at that number. I was like, hold on a second. It was only like 22 miles off the ground. It wasn't anywhere near space. So I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked too much into what the expectations that SpaceX had set for this in terms of the height before releasing Starship and Super Heavy. But clearly, that was low when you put it in terms of where other rockets will separate their stages. 100 miles off the surface of the Earth, they were 1/5 of that, and only about 1/3 of the way to space itself, where we define the Kármán line of space being. I'm gonna turn around here. Just walking back and forth in the bay. So overall, putting this in a perspective that most people will understand, that seeing this explosion, it was not anything unusual. It was not unexpected. The fact that it even cleared the pad was what they wanted. That was the whole goal. That was the primary mission. Everything after that is data collection. Up until that point of explosion, even the explosion itself, that's all data collection. Now, to some other things. The pad they built. What the heck were they doing with the pad they built? No flame trench. Virtually no water suppression system, sound suppression system, and it absolutely wrecked the pad. If you've seen any other rocket launch, there's a flame trench that diverts all the energy away from the pad so that it doesn't damage the structure there, and that was absolutely not the case with Starship. And I'm like, what math are we missing here? Like, why didn't you put that there? And of course, people are bringing up old tweets from Musk and stuff, and that he doesn't want to have that flame trench there. And it's like, but why? Look at what just happened. It's going to take them, they said, about 1 to 2 months to be ready for another flight due to the damage. Whereas they have other rockets ready to go. It's more of this point of just being able to get the pad back into operational use. But now I hope it's very clear that there needs to be some sort of a system in place that diverts all that energy away. We've already seen multiple videos from media and other people who were able to put their cameras up near to the pad of cameras getting destroyed. Of the one video, I believe it was for NASA spaceflight, their car got wrecked. It got shot by a chunk of concrete. There are other videos showing concrete flying into the Gulf of Mexico at more than 160 miles per hour, way away from the pad. So clearly there has to be some other system in place that will allow them to put this much energy into the area and protect the area itself. We're not just talking the structure, we're talking about the environment too. And this is kind of where Earth Day comes in. So you have a rocket of this size blasting out all these forces, and this is already, under a lot of contention where they're launching from in this nature preserve. It's a protected area, very similar, to how Kennedy Space Center is also built in a protected area. So arguments can be made that Kennedy Space Center should be doing more to protect the local area, but same thing with SpaceX. This is a privately owned pad basically at this point, where it's not on another government facility. They're not renting it or releasing it from anyone, and they need to be responsible for the local ecosystem. So to get the FAA license, they need to meet a certain minimum requirement for environmental regulations, which they got the launch license, so they meet those regulations, and they do conservation work, and they do beach cleanups, and they have different systems in place to protect some aspects of that local ecosystem. So in order to have more of a future use at this pad, they are going to have to be doing even more. We should be pushing for them to do more to protect the local ecosystem down in Boca Chica, because we don't want to see this place just get wrecked. This is already, if you've been paying attention to what people have been saying, there are migratory birds that come here all the time. And if rockets are going to be going off, especially at the rate that they want them to, where they're talking thousands of launches a year and multiple in a single day, where you're going to be scaring off these birds, and you're going to be taking away this habitat for these animals at the same time. So, all of this needs to be considered. That's just one point, but the same can be said for multiple species that live in that area and different plants. We know that there was that explosion, I think it was 2 years ago, where one of the actual tests of Starship going up and belly flopping, that caught some of the ground on fire, some of the plants and stuff on fire around it. So that all needs to be taken into more consideration too, because this is an extremely powerful machine that is going to be having a severe impact on the environment around it. And we can't just be out there destroying ecosystems for the sake of quote unquote technological progress. We can't just be blind to all of that. We have these ecosystems, we have these at-risk species that live in these places, and we already know that there's so much overdevelopment going on, especially down here in Florida where I live. It's all the time, and as an astronomer, I'm losing the sky. I've seen light bubbles pop up all around me over the past couple of years as new developments and new sections of cities get built, and the sky is literally shrinking. I'm seeing fewer stars in the darker areas around where I live. So as we're building rockets, as we're trying to make humanity and other forms of life multiplanetary, we need to be taking all of this into consideration. This isn't just a push ahead at whatever cost. This is a fine balance that we need to be walking, and I hope that we can really start holding SpaceX and holding Musk especially accountable for what they are doing down in Boca Chica, and to be mitigating the risks, to be mitigating the destruction of these ecosystems and of any other local habitat in the area surrounding the Gulf and wherever else they choose to launch from in the future. And of course, they are building that pad over at Kennedy Space Center directly beside 39A. And like we just saw, you launch a rocket this big, it's going to be destroying stuff around it. And they should put in some sort of suppression system, some sort of launch trench, because look at what just happened and imagine the damage that you could do to 39A if this pad that's 1,000 feet away from it is launching Starships at the cadence that they want it to be. So there's a lot more that we could discuss here, but I just wanted to bring all those points in to this video and just give some people who either didn't see it or didn't really know what was going on a chance to explore some of these points, both the pros and the cons, and what everything means when we talk about these successful failures. That yes, it exploded, but that doesn't matter in terms of the progress that they are trying to make. What matters is that they gained data and they learned that somewhere something went wrong. Now they can develop a new iteration and continue from there. And they already have multiple rockets in the pipeline. That is just how these sorts of things work, and that is how you build successful infrastructure like this in order to make things safer, make things more reliable, and be able to produce them more efficiently. So SpaceX is famous for this. They test to destruction, extreme testing, whereas places like NASA will do a lot behind the scenes things and not let the public see it. But this, in my eyes, I've preferred SpaceX's show the public everything method in terms of launches and failures and everything like that. And to set the record straight, SpaceX has only lost 2 rockets during missions. The first one was back on June 28th, 2015. There was an in-flight, I think it was CRS-7 or something like that. There was an in-flight explosion that occurred. And again, prior to a flight with Amos 6 back on September 1st, 2016, I know exactly where I was when that one happened, and that one exploded on the pad due to I believe it was a faulty helium tank issue. So, setting the record straight, those were the only 2 mission critical failures that occurred for SpaceX since their first successful launch to orbit in 2006. So when you hear people talking about SpaceX only builds rockets that explode all the time, and when are they actually going to build something that works? Remember, SpaceX has launched almost 200 missions, and they have lost 2 rockets in all of that time. The ones that you're seeing explode are either tests of when they were trying to land on the drone ship or land back on ground, where they hadn't fully developed that technology yet, and so they just it would tip over and explode, or it would crumple a leg and explode. Something would happen, but they have greatly increased the amount of successes that they have with that, and very, very, very few are actually ever lost these days due to any mishaps during the mission. And the ones that they do lose are now intentional. So no rockets except for those 2 have ever been lost in mission critical failures, and the ones that you do see explode have all been tests or not the primary goal of the mission. So setting that record straight, because it's a verifiable fact and people love to use it all the time, and it's like, come on guys, like, stop, because it's not what's actually happening. And they are one of the most reliable orbital providers in the world, if not the most at this point. Of course, they have a lot of work that needs to be done on all fronts, but you can't take that success away from them for what they have achieved. So I just want to end the video here now. Talked about a lot, went on for about 5 minutes longer than I was intending. So I'm just going to say, I'm Alex Martin. I'm here at the Bay Park right now. to talk about this, especially here on Earth Day. Hopefully we covered a bunch of the environmental issues with Starship a few minutes ago. But catch us around Sarasota and Bradenton and up north in St. Pete for our free Sidewalk Science Centers. Sometimes when there's rockets going off, we'll stop everything and make sure that people are able to see that. Follow us on Facebook at Sidewalk Science Center, and same thing with Instagram. And you can hire us out for private events. We'll come to your house and do a whole astronomy night with our telescopes, and we'll do science experiments with kids and families at Backyard Science Lab, among other events that we offer and programs that we offer. So to all your endeavors, because we have a future to create, I'm Alex Martin, and I'll see you on the next one.